Welcome into CBS Sports Network. You are watching the only show that covers the game of basketball all the way from the recruiting trail to the NBA draft. I'm Adam Finkelstein. I'm here with Isaac Trotter, and right off the bat, we are going to talk about 4 big-time games this weekend. And with March right around the corner, literally this weekend, these are games that can clinch at least a share of the conference championships in the 4 biggest conferences in college basketball. It begins Friday night, that's tonight. Michigan at Illinois. Here's the scenario. Michigan has a 3-game lead going into the game with 3 to play. So they've already clinched a tie. Nebraska and Michigan State are tied with Illinois at 13-4. So Michigan can clinch outright the Big Ten regular season title with a win. Illinois has lost 3 of their last 5 games, all in overtime. Michigan won 12 straight Big Ten games. Of course, they had the slight blip in the radar last weekend against Duke. But Trotter, I'm calling this one the Battle of the Giants. What do people need to know about what's going to happen tonight?
Yeah, no question. They are going to be a bunch of big dudes on the floor at one time. I think there's going to be like 8 guys who are 6'6" or taller together. We might see 3 guys who are 7 feet or taller on the floor together at the same time as well, in Ademara, Tomislav Ivicic, and Zvonimir Ivicic. But the biggest story, I think, in this game is the Merez Johnson revenge game. He is a guy who Illinois invested a ton in as a freshman, was one of the better freshmen in the Big Ten last year. He hit the transfer portal and transfers to Michigan. Now he returns to Champaign, and this is going to be a high-level game. You know, I think both of these teams think that they could win the national championship, and on paper, I think Illinois believes that it could replicate a lot of that Duke game plan that gave Michigan trouble. They can drag them into the half court. They have shooting bigs that can pull Ademar and Merez Johnson away from the rim and kind of limit some of Michigan's outstanding rim protection. And they're a terrific rebounding team, which is what you need. So a high-level brawl, a ton of skilled size, 2 of the best recruiters in the Big Ten, and the 2 teams in the Big Ten that probably have the best chance to win the national title this year.
All right, I want to drill into something you said there. You talked about Illinois' ability to pull Michigan's bigs away from the basket. To me, that is a requisite of what it takes to beat this Michigan team, because I think there are candidly very few teams in the country capable of beating the Wolverines. Duke, obviously one of them, but I think pulling their bigs away from the basket is a critical part of that game plan. Of course, every big that Illinois puts on the floor can do that. That's why it opens the lane up for Wagler and other guards to make plays. Stojakovic, of course, Kylan Boswell's back. The other vulnerability I see for Michigan is just that they can be a little turnover prone at times. We know that's been an Achilles heel for Elliot Cadeau predating his arrival in Ann Arbor. That was a factor even to a greater extent in North Carolina. So those to me are the 2 vulnerabilities I see with this Michigan team. What happens when their bigs get pulled away from the basket defensively, and what happens when somebody turns them over? Illinois does not turn people over. Their defense is not designed to do that, but their bigs, to your point, are designed to stretch opposing defenses. So it's going to be an interesting one. That one's going to go down in just about 7 hours from Friday night ball. Again, Michigan can win the Big Ten. They've already got a share, a 3-game lead in the Big Ten championship. So that's one to watch. Tomorrow, we have a triple header, really, of home games that could clinch conference championships. It begins with Virginia at Duke. That game is at noon. A win for Duke would give them a 2-game lead with 2 games to play. And of course, the tiebreaker over Virginia. So that would give them at least a tie, as well as the top seed in the ACC tournament. UVA hasn't won in Durham since 2022, but this is a new UVA program under Ryan Odom. So Trotter, what are you looking for in this matchup?
The fun part of this one is I think the best 2 players get to guard each other on both ends of the floor. And Cameron Boozer, obviously National Player of the Year frontrunner for Duke, just walks out of bed and creates winning shots. He was just so dominant every single game this year. And he's going up against Testa Ritter, who has been one of the best newcomers in the ACC. Now, I refuse to call him a freshman. He is listed as a freshman because academically he is his first year in college, but he's 23 years old out of Belgium. He has 2 years of eligibility. So functionally, he is a junior, and he will be more than ready for the physical aspect of this game. But the best part about UVA and Duke right now is like there's just so many good players on the floor. Virginia has 9-man rotation. Like they all have like just come in and contribute in a lot of ways. Duke, same type of deal. They kind of get contributions up and down the roster. And that's the beauty of this thing. I think these are the 2 most talented rosters in the ACC. And for my money, I think these are the two teams that have the best like build to go deep into March, just because they can play so many different ways and win games in different ways. And I'm just fascinated to see how Duke's high level defense, if they can find answers to the test against a Virginia offense that can kind of beat you at every single level with, 8, 9 guys.
All right, so the defense is exactly what I wanted to ask you about because people will remember earlier in the season, Duke was ranked in the top 10 nationally defensively, but we were on this show saying, hey, they're mixing in some zone. It's not necessarily as good to the eye test as the analytics may suggest. Now, 3 months later, it is that good. They are the number one ranked defense in the country. They've been dominant. And when you look at their analytics, they basically do everything. They force tough shots. They're a great rebounding team. They even turn you over some, which is a lot of the best defensive teams don't create quite as much pressure, but they're just determined to get force tough shots and make you one and done. Duke does that, but they also turn you over more than most. And then this is the thing to me that is impressive. While they do turn you over, they also never foul. I think the one potential liability in their defensive blueprint is that they give up threes, at least a volume of threes. They don't give up a high percentage, meaning the other team doesn't typically make them, but the other team gets them off. So it suggests to me that if Duke is vulnerable, it's to like the home run hitting, high variance team that's going to shoot a lot of threes and try and force a lot of turnovers because Duke, like Michigan, can be a little turnover prone when we're talking about one of the top teams in the country. So quickly from you, just a sense of how Duke has gone from someone that was, I don't want to say using smoke and mirrors, but having to get more creative on the defensive end in the beginning of the season to now a team that is just arguably the best defensive unit in the country.
It would be a feather in why Jon Scheyer should be the National Coach of the Year. I think they've done terrific work on that end, getting real buy-in. I think part of it is a little bit different personnel. They've really just unramped and let Dame Sarr go to work, and he's been just a terrific point of attack defender for them. So that certainly helps. But the defense that we saw from Duke in December compared to the defense we've seen right now in February feels like two drastically different units. And Jon Scheyer deserves a huge kudos for that.
All right, the third potential championship that can be clinched this weekend will happen when Kansas visits Arizona. Kansas is currently 11-4 in Big 12 play. Arizona is 13-2. This one takes place Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. So that means Arizona's got a 2-game lead with 3 to play. Now, Kansas is tied with Iowa State, Houston, and Texas Tech, who are also 11-4. A win would give Arizona at least a share of the conference tournament. The other reason, conference championship, pardon me. The other reason why this one is interesting is because I am expecting Koa Pete to be back in action. He's missed quite a bit of time recently with the hand injury. We've learned some things about this Arizona team in his absence. Trotter, what are you looking for aside from the normal Darren Peterson headlines as Kansas visits Arizona tomorrow?
Yeah, so I was down in Lawrence last week, and I got to see them play Cincinnati. And Cincinnati basically big boyed Kansas up front. Mustafa Cham and Baba Miller were able to kind of insert their will. And when I watch Kansas, I'm like, man, they just don't have a lot of bricks in their britches. And that's a very nervous type of approach heading into this game against Arizona, who has arguably the most physical front court in college basketball, especially with Tobe Awaka, Motias Krivas. If they can get Koa Pete back on the floor, that would certainly help there as well. So I'm looking at Bryson Tiller. He has got to play his best defensive game of the year. If I'm Tommy Lloyd, I'm looking at that Cincinnati tape and trying to do a lot of those same things. Isolate Bryson Tiller inside and see if he can hold up against the brute force monsters that Arizona has up front. But this should be a war. I really like how Arizona has played without Koa Pete, getting a little bit more skill on the floor, kind of shifting Ivan Karchenkov down to the 4. So I'm just kind of curious as they work back Koa Pete back into the lineup, just how much does Tommy Lloyd kind of still lean on that kind of 4 guards or 3 guards and a wing type of approach instead of the double big lineup that's been just a staple of Arizona all year?
I think Karchenkov playing some 4 has given them a different dimension. It's also been somewhat out of necessity because Dwayne Aristote has been out of the lineup as well. And Arizona's basically been playing 6 guys here. So you have to wonder, if depth becomes an issue at any point. The player I want to highlight real quickly for Arizona, Anthony Del Orso, is playing great, and it's really changing the spacing of their team. He's 11 of 25 from the three-point line over the last 6 games, and he's 8 of 18 over the last 3. So when you're game planning for Arizona and you look down and you say, hey, he's only 32% from behind the arc on the year, that number's outdated and it's not representative of the type of gravity he has right now. And it's really opening up the floor for a team that already dominates the paint with Koa Pete short rolling, with Krivas ducking in, and of course they're going hard to the rim both in transition and on the offensive glass. So I think Del Orso's emergence has been an important subplot of Koa Pete's absence, in addition to seeing that they can put Karchenkov at the 4 and kind of play with more traditional 4-out spacing. Last game to highlight of the weekend, Arkansas at Florida. This is Saturday, 8:30 p.m. on ESPN. Arkansas and Alabama are both at 11-4, second in the SEC. Florida is 13-2. So that means that if Florida wins and Alabama loses, they're on the road at Tennessee, then Florida wins outright. A Florida win would give them at least a share, regardless of what happens at Alabama. So it's going to be an interesting game. Now, Trotter, I want to flash back to December 19th on this very show. You and I were talking, and I think we were in agreement that we thought, despite the slow start, that Florida was still the best team in the SEC. They are on the verge of clinching it. What has allowed them to really turn the corner after the perception of a slow start this year?
It's a great question. I think it really kind of comes down to just all 8 guys in their rotation are playing the best version of themselves right now. Like, they've just have been able to find a way. For Alex Condon has turned back into a lower turnover rate guy who can make a lot of good plays for you on both ends of the floor. You're seeing Xavier Lee play like the player they thought they were going to get. You're seeing Boogie Fland, even when the jumpers aren't going in. He's been a terrific defensive piece. Now, he will be tested against Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas, who are putting out together an all-time historic freshman type of production for Arkansas. But it just feels like Florida found their depth. Irvin Klobjar has turned into a really nice player. Isaiah Brown has turned into a really nice complementary player. Ruben Chinyulu's been awesome. Micah Handlockton's helped. And so it's just like, I felt like it's Florida trusting the process there. But let's pat ourselves on the back for that one. We did not sell our stock in Florida early. We were all in on the Gators, still winning the SEC even in December. And they have done their best to prove us right.
No doubt about that. Arkansas has a top 5 offense in the country with Darius Acuff at the helm of the program. Florida with a top 5 defense. So that end of the floor is going to be fascinating. The Gators, still a bad 3-point shooting team. I could try and phrase it more nicely, but they still don't make shots. If they do, on the nights when they do, just give them the win and get out of there. Speaking of getting out of there, we got to take a quick break. We will be back in just a couple minutes. We're going to talk about some of the most undervalued players in college basketball. That's coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back into the CBS Sports Network. We've spent a lot of time talking about guys like Cam Boozer, AJ DeBonsa, Darren Peterson, a lot of the biggest names in college basketball. But in this segment, we are going to talk about our all underappreciated team. These are names you should know heading into March Madness, but may not necessarily be at the top of your search engine feed just yet. So we're joined by Eric Bossi and Travis Branham. And Ebos, since you are the resident OG of the group, we will give you the first pick. Who is your guy for the all underappreciated team?
I'm going with Mark Mitchell at Missouri. And frankly, this is one that I've been stewing on for a while now, especially after about a month ago here locally. Sports Radio was talking about how he hasn't really improved over 4 years in his college career, which couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, he's gotten better every single year of his college career since being McDonald's All-American in the class of 2022, and is having his best year ever. And the stats certainly back it up. And, you know, I'm happy to get into that if you're ready.
Oh, I'm ready. Hit me.
Okay. We're talking about a guy who is averaging 17.4 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 3-point assists per game. He's only the second player ever in Missouri history to do that, to lead the team in points, rebounds, and assists. The last guy was Albert White in the 98-99 season, who ironically enough was a transfer and a former McDonald's All-American himself. But what really shows is when you peel behind the numbers and see how much Mitchell means to Mizzou on the floor. He's a most versatile guy. He allows them to play really big by being a bit of a point small forward who can also play the 4 and the 5 at times. But here's a stat that really stands out to me, and I want to shout out Trotter for helping me out on this one. Against top 100 opponents, Missouri has a net rating of -30 when he's off the floor. So if you played 100 possessions with Mark Mitchell off the floor against top 100 teams, Mizzou's going to be outscored 127 to 97 in those possessions. So it's really hard for me to find another guy who is that critical to his team, especially as a front court player. You know, he's a guy who was third team All SEC last year. I think he's definitely in contention to be a first team All SEC guy this year. Mark Mitchell, really, really good on a team that's now projected to make the tournament in Missouri.
Well, to all the local radio stations out there in Mizzou County or country, I think that noise you just heard was Bossy dropping the mic. Fair enough. I got nothing to add. Trotter, we will go to you. Who is your selection for the all underappreciated team?
Yeah, I've really liked watching Virginia this year. And honestly, one of the most underappreciated players for them is Sam Lewis. He's just 6'7", transfer out of Toledo. Wasn't a guy that we liked him in the portal, but we weren't like obsessed with him. He wasn't a top 30, 50 transfer, but he's just been so solid for them. About 39% from 3-point range this year, can play on or off the ball, makes good decisions. He rebounds. He's tough defensively. And this is a Virginia team that can kind of play 8 or 9 guys. And it feels like Sam Lewis is the guy that Ryan Odom and his staff have wanted on the floor more than almost any other guard in this rotation. They don't mess with his minutes at all. He's close to that 28 to 30 minute range every night. And just like, I think it's a good like message maybe moving forward of like what works in portal scouting. And it's guys that can have, you know, shot versatility. He's over 40% on his off the dribble threes, and he's over 39% on his catch and shoot threes. So when you're big and you make good plays on both sides of the ball and you don't make mistakes and you're able to make shots like that, just been really helpful. And he's a really sneaky piece in why Virginia has become one of the best teams in the ACC.
I also think it's a good example of getting the valuation right. I mean, depth has become a byproduct of finding dollar value in whatever your budget is. And it should come as no surprise that Ryan Odom and his staff are really smart and really forward thinking. And Sam Lewis, to your point, is a terrific example of that. Trav, you're up next. Who is your selection for the all underappreciated team?
Yeah, it's Florida's Ruben Chinyelu. This guy has been an absolute monster. And going back to his days in high school, this was a kid, and I got the receipts to prove it. I called him Oscar Tshiebwe 2.0, and he has been just that. Now, Oscar Tshiebwe was the National Player of the Year. Ruben Chinyelu playing against one of the most loaded classes we have ever seen come through college basketball. It's not necessarily getting the same spotlight as a guy like Oscar did when he was at Kentucky. Now, Oscar's also playing on within one of the best front courts in the entire country. And Alex Condon gets a big spotlight. Micah Hayne-Lockton is a guy that doesn't get enough spotlight. And frankly, he's just buried beneath two really, really good big men. But to me, Ruben Chinyelu is the star of that front court with his physicality, his length, his never-ending motor. This dude is a beast, and he can move his feet out on the perimeter. He dominates on the glass. He blocks his shots, and then he finishes and cleans up around the rim. This guy, to me, is a beast, and I think he is knocking on the door for first-round contention, in my opinion, if not at least very high at the second round.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head. Ruben Chinyelu, as the most recent update of the CBS Sports Big Board, in large part thanks to your urging, urging is a polite word, is up to number 31 on the CBS Sports Big Board. How about this? I think this is really critical to understanding his value. So his last 2 games were not anything special from a statistical standpoint. But before those 2 games, he'd gotten 16 or more rebounds in 4 of his last 5 games. That's staggering in and of itself. But what's even more staggering is the fact that he only played more than 25 minutes once in that span. So his rebounding averages on a per minute basis are absolutely off the charts. It's why, to your point, a big reason why he is knocking on that first round door. Here's another reason. At last year's G League Elite Camp, this guy measured 6'9" without shoes on. Okay, great. With a 7'7" 3/4 wingspan. And if you think that was like maybe an error, no, he measured with the same 7'7" 3/4 wingspan earlier when he was at NBA Academy. So he is freakishly long with an absolutely NBA ready and then some body. So to your point, he's been great, but I also think it's worth mentioning Alex Condon's been playing some of his best basketball of the season as of late too. And if those guys ever start clicking on the same game, that's when Florida with Thomas Hawk at the 3 is absolutely at their best. If they can make a 3 from their backcourt on those days too, we could see him in Indy again this year. All right, that means I am up, and my selection for the all underappreciated team, we're going to Arkansas, and I want to talk a little bit about Billy Richmond, because Billy Richmond has been awesome. He's got 20 or more points in his last 4 games, and beyond the numbers, which are impressive, this guy's energy level is absolutely through the roof. He's a high-level athlete who can ignite that home crowd in a way that is virtually unmatched. He can jump into passing lanes. He can get loose for explosive dunks. He's been figuring out ways to impact the game and playing off Darius Acuff. Remember, Billy Richmond in high school was someone who was kind of like a jumbo initiator. But with Acuff handling so much of that volume, Richmond really has to be able to find his niche. And in those last 4 games, he's averaging 22 points, 3 assists against just a turnover and a half. So he's got a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, 3 rebounds, 2 steals. He's 3 of 6 from behind the 3-point line. And obviously the shooting is the big Achilles heel. But again, it's just the overlap of athleticism, energy, and defensive intensity, which I really think helps to establish the culture for that Arkansas program. It's also, I think, important to note that Arkansas has gone 3-1 in that time. Their only loss was in that double overtime game at Alabama. And those wins were really important ones because they were all against teams fighting for a spot in the NCAA tournament in Auburn, Mizzou, and Texas A&M. So a really important 3-1 stretch for Arkansas, in which Billy Richmond stepped up to be, at the very least, a really important Robin to the Darius Acuff Batman version that we're seeing, and that dynamic duo been absolutely huge for Arkansas. Speaking of Darius Acuff, you're not going to want to go anywhere, because we are going to do a deep dive on this Arkansas freshman coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back into the CBS Sports Network. On this segment of the show, we are going to do a deep dive on Darius Acuff. Now, Darius Acuff finished his senior season at IMG Academy as the 5th ranked prospect and number 1 point guard in the national recruiting class. Now, that was a ranking that, candidly, we took some grief for earlier on. So we're going to revisit it now, not just because he's playing great, but because there's a real conversation to be had about just how great he's been. John Calipari raised it earlier this year and asked rhetorically why he wasn't in the conversation for National Player of the Year. I do think Cameron Boozer has earned at least the lead in that spot. But I also think it's fair to say that Acuff has been as important to Arkansas as any player in the country has been to their respective team. So, Trotter, I'm going to start with you. Can you help me frame just how good Darius Acuff has been and how vital he has been to the Razorbacks' success so far?
Well, it's historical stuff. You know, he's averaging over 22 points and over 6 assists per game. We've only had one player in a 30-year span that's been able to do numbers like that, and that would be Trae Young. So, like, that kind of encompasses the type of individual season he's having. And this is the year of the freshman, no doubt. Like, the type of freshman that we're having historically, this freshman class is putting up production that we just haven't seen in a really, really long time. And Acuff is near the top of that. I think if you're power ranking, like, hey, the best freshman guards like this season in college basketball, I think Keaton Wagler from Illinois, Kingston Flemings from Houston, and then Darius Acuff from Arkansas feel like the 3 front runners right now. That's not a shot at Darren Peterson. We already know that conversation. It's not a shot at Mikael Brown Jr., who's getting back from his injury and starting to play at a high level. But those 3 guys have just been so instrumental for teams that have national championship upsides. But the things that Acuff is doing, the type of special shooting season he has, if you want to rank him number 1 of all freshman guards in college basketball this year, I don't think anybody would really argue with that. The stuff he's doing is just ridiculous bonkers.
So that is my contention, that he is the most valuable freshman guard in the country right now. And I say that knowing that both KenPom.com and EvanMaya.com have Keaton Wagler rated according to their own proprietary analytics formula above Acuff. But I just go back to, you take Acuff off Arkansas, and I don't think it's an NCAA tournament team. You take Wagler off Illinois, and I would argue that was maybe the team they were planning for when they thought Wagler was a potential redshirt. I know that's not the narrative that everybody's Wagler storytelling is fitting this week, but that's kind of the reality that we've addressed on this show, is that no one at Illinois was expecting Wagler to be this good. Bossy, Trav, I want to talk to you now about kind of a rankings revisited type thing, because when we do rankings, we're trying to synthesize multiple variables, right? The least of which is who's the best high school player. Most important is who's the best NBA prospect when you're talking about the very top of the class. And next best is who's going to be the best college player. As I said, I think Acuff has lived up to his billing as the best guard in college basketball. But I'll ask you first. I'll ask you both, Bossy, you first, and then Trav, you can just follow. Like, looking back, where would you have Acuff now in that 2025 recruiting class, trying to synthesize both of those variables, the college impact along with the NBA upside?
Me personally, I'd have him right exactly where we had him at number 5. If you look back at that top 5 of Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonson, Nate Ament, and then, or Cam Boozer, Nate Ament, and then Darius, the only thing that I would maybe change is maybe put Caleb Wilson into the top 5. But Acuff has done it all, man. To piggyback off of what Trotter said, he's on pace to be the first power conference player to average 20 points, 5 assists on 50-40 shooting splits since Kenny Anderson in 1989, 1990. That's a long time, man. He's backed it up in every way. I think personally, and I may be an outlier on this, I think he's a top 5 draft pick in this upcoming draft. So where I sit and how I see things have unfolded for him, what he's doing for Arkansas compared to what he did in high school and what we thought he might do, I think he's right on track. And I wouldn't change anything about how we rated him.
So, all right, Trav, before you jump in, I got to follow up with that one. So, Bossy, if you think he's a top 5 pick, that means you're taking him before Wagler or Flemings then?
Yeah, I reserve the right to change my opinion over these next couple of games, but I've been really watching a lot of Darius Acuff lately, and I just think that he's been a little bit underrated out there. He just does so much, and he does it with so much directed at him. He is number 1 on every scouting report, as I'm sure Flemings and Wagler probably are too, but he's just, Arkansas is so reliant upon him in a high usage rate to really create for them, and he doesn't have a lot to lean on. DJ Wagner has been an okay vet, but frankly, he hasn't been what we thought he would be. And he's also, he's raised the play of Malik Thomas over there. Malik Thomas is another 5-star freshman, but they're now going to be one of the only freshman duos in SEC in the last 40 years to average 15 points apiece or more. And I think that Acuff is a huge reason for that. And I think he's made everyone on that Arkansas team better.
All right, Trav, where are you at on this discussion?
Yeah, I absolutely love him. But Bussy said something very important I want to address real quick. He said, I reserve the right to change my opinion. I'm going to be sliding that in my back pocket. You're going to be hearing that line a lot from me, because I don't know if you guys know, things get contentious with us behind the scenes, and they're always throwing opinions of us in our own faces. But I absolutely love him. I think what he has shown this year, it's been funny to watch play out, because if you just started watching Darius Acuff play this season, I'm noticing a trend, because it's similar to what some of the opinions and things that we felt when we were watching him in high school. You kind of watch him and you see the high volume that he plays with, and you wonder, can this kid really impact winning? And it kind of comes across as distasteful. But the longer you watch him, as long as we've been watching him, you end up just absolutely loving what he brings to the table. This kid's an absolute hooper. He's averaging over 1.4 points per possession plus assists, over 1.2 points per possession, nearly 1 point per possession in isolations, 1.2 points per possession in ball screens, and he's also extremely efficient and effective off of the ball. This kid can just absolutely deal out all sorts of damage on the offensive end with his scoring on and off the ball and with his playmaking. I think this is one that we just frankly all overthink. And again, the people that are hating him online right now, they're just seeing him now later. And so they're in that same progression that we were in high school. And at some point, I think everybody will come around and just absolutely love what this kid brings to the court.
I'm going to say it plainly. I think Darius Acuff is the best freshman guard in college basketball right now. I think he's proven himself to be a lottery pick. We can have a debate about whether Kingston Flemings or Michael Brown, how they rate in terms of who's the best long-term prospect, but I do think Acuff has established himself as the best college basketball player this season. I had the opportunity to see him in high school more than most, especially earlier in the year, and there was an alpha type quality. Like, this guy took over games in ways that were comparable to DeBonsa and Peterson. I mean, just straight team jump on my back. I'm going to do some heroic stuff and win us this game. And I saw that multiple times last year. He was as dominant a high school player, player, not necessarily with the measurables to be the long-term prospect in that conversation with DeBonsa or Peterson or Boozer, but as dominant a high school player as I saw. And I do think now people are starting to see what we saw last year, why we ranked him as high as we did in the top 5. It kind of mystifies me that some people had him outside the top 20. He's going to be a lottery pick. He's probably going to be the SEC player of the year. He's probably going to be a first team All-American guy. He's been every bit as good as advertised. I will leave you with this. Darius Acuff's last 5 games, he's averaged 30 points, 5.8 assists, 3.6 rebounds, a steal, while shooting 53% from the floor and 49% from the three-point line. And if you want to go look for his worst game of the season, you're going to be looking a long time. He hasn't had less than 17 points in a game since November, and that was in a blowout bye-win game. This guy doesn't really have off nights. He has some off shooting nights, but he brings it every single night for Arkansas, and that's why we're talking about him in the way that we are. All right, you're going to want to stick around here. We've got some recruiting intel coming up next here on the CBS Sports Network. We'll be right back. If you've been watching this show for the last few months, you know that almost no piece of recruiting news comes without us telling you it's going to happen first. The most recent example was Jordan Smith just a couple weeks ago. We told you to look out for that commitment to Arkansas. A few hours later, it was official. And that pattern has repeated itself time and time again this season. Earlier today, over on 247sports.com, Travis released the Branham Report, which is where you can find the written version of quite a bit of this intel. So, Trav, we're going to run down this list, and we're going to get some Abbasi's perspective as well. Let's start with the number 1 ranked prospect in the country, Tyran Stokes. He was on Kansas's campus for that BYU game. Of course, that was the first half in which Darren Peterson went nuts. It was a huge win for Kansas. The fog was rocking. You would think that was an impressive sight to behold for Mr. Stokes. But what is the latest for the top-ranked prospect in the country?
Yeah, it was over a month ago that we kind of named that Kansas was now the leader. Kentucky entered the fall as our 24/7 sports leader, but Kansas continued to fight and make a very strong push. And according to sources over the past few months, Stokes has been very keen and very interested on the Kansas Jayhawks over the Kentucky Wildcats. However, since that crystal ball prediction was placed, he has taken an additional visit to Fog Allen Fieldhouse. But as we continue to progress into the month of March, all the information I've gathered, frankly, this recruitment's even muddier than it was a month ago. I'm having a hard time getting a gauge on which direction this could go, and there's a lot of potential that there are more twists and turns in the weeks ahead. And if I was a betting man, first off, based on my information, there's no decision that's been imminent, contrary to the smoke that is going on around out there. If I was a betting man, I would think that this thing continues on through the month of March and could leak into the month of April.
Yeah. I think a lot of this has been created on how many times there's been rumor swirling and smoke in the air that Tyran could go ahead and make a commitment. You referenced that visit to Kansas. I think there was an expectation out there, at least in the Twitter world, on the message boards, whatever Discord you're subscribing to, that Tyran may commit shortly after that visit. We certainly heard some of that. We heard it from some pretty good sources, but also at the time, in checking with some of the sources most close to the situation, they made it pretty clear to us that Tyran probably was on a little bit of a slower commitment train than it was looking like, and that we really need to think more around the McDonald's All-American game, possibly into early April before commitment. So I think part of this there's been kind of conflicting reports out there, and many of them are very well sourced. I don't blame people who've reported that things look imminent, because we've certainly heard some of that too. But I think he's actually still on the time frame that has been expected for a little bit, and there's just been some wires crossed. And then you add that, Tyron's just kind of an unpredictable kid as it is, and there's been some talk about them, maybe reaching out and exploring possibilities with some other schools that weren't on his final list. And here we are now. I do still think Kansas is the favorite as we go down the home stretch, but certainly they've still got work to do.
All right, just to summarize things we've talked about before, initially Kentucky was perceived as the favorite, then Kansas was perceived as the favorite. But just to say the quiet part out loud, Tyran has signed an NIL deal with Nike. Kansas is as high profile an Adidas school as there is. That's not to say he can't commit there, but it is to say that it would be complicated and take a lot of preparation. So I think that's potential one reason why it's getting held up. The other reason is maybe it's not that easy to commit to an Adidas school when you are a Nike sponsored NIL athlete. Those are some of the biggest dynamics at play here that I do think is contributing to the extension of this process. Trav, let's go to Prolific Prep. They've got 2 top 10 players there, both uncommitted. Want to start with Caleb Holt. Caleb Holt is, in my opinion, he and Jordan Smith are the 2 guys most ready to impact winning at the college level. We've talked about his recruitment a number of times here on this show, but it sounds like we're getting closer to the finish line with 2 leaders emerging. Is that right?
Yes, and this has been the case with Caleb Holt for a while. Back in the fall, Kentucky was the heavy favorite for him, but things changed heading into the early signing period with the Wildcats falling far down the leaderboard. And Arizona, of all people, really skyrocketing up to the top. They kind of came out of nowhere in this recruitment, got him on an official visit, and gained a tremendous amount of traction. We had them as the leader at 24/7 Sports. However, in recent weeks, Alabama and NATOs have not gone away, and in fact have been gaining more traction and gaining momentum heading down to this final stretch. Now, Caleb was one that we were being told was probably leaning towards making a college commitment in late March or early April around that McDonald's All-American game. However, I'm starting to get the sense that he could be speeding things up and coming down to a decision earlier. And that's going to be the case with several of these players, because these coaches in college programs, they're making plans for the transfer portal, and they want to know who they have on board and who they're building around, especially in a guy like Caleb Holt and Bruce Branch. Those are guys you want to build your team around. And so they're going to want to have a good idea. And I think the pressure's ramping. You could see these commitments speed up a little bit more.
Trav, you mentioned Bruce Branch, and then Bossy, I'm coming right to you. But Bruce Branch, there's a lot of speculation that a commitment is imminent for him. What can you tell us about that one, Trav?
Yeah, so this is another one. He was expected to wait until late March or early April, but I have placed him firmly on commitment watch, and we have placed now a crystal ball in for the BYU Cougars. They entered this recruitment after his reclassification as the leader. He was the number 1 overall player in the class of 2027. He now ranks as the number 6 overall player in the class of 2026. And he's only taken 2 visits since that reclassification this winter, one to BYU, and most recently he went to USC. And it's not sounding likely that he will be making any other trips before making a college decision. And it sounds like BYU has continued to gain momentum and expand their lead on the pack.
All right, Bossy, here's my take. You tell me if you agree or disagree with this. Under Kevin Young, BYU is now establishing themselves as a program that can get guys to the lottery on that one-and-done pathway. Yegor Demon came last year. He was the number 8 pick in the draft to the Nets, which was higher than most people expected going into draft night. AJ DeBonza has a very good chance to be the top pick in the draft. If not, it's hard to imagine he slips behind at number 2. So if Branch ends up there, he is the next player in that line. But it's an interesting scenario because Demon and DeBonza were used in very different ways. And I think the way in which those freshmen were utilized had ripple effects to the way BYU played. I think BYU moved the ball a whole lot more 2 seasons ago. They were a team that played with great spacing. The ball was popping. This year, they're much more of an ISO-centric team. DeBonza's putting up almost historic numbers, but everything starts with him, and he has the freedom to dribble his way into ISOs and be the first domino every time down. I don't think it's fair to ask Bruce Branch or anyone else in this freshman class for that matter to take on the role DeBonza is playing this year. So I think if he ends up there, what you're going to see is BYU going back to maybe the way they played 2 years ago, utilizing Branch's length, his shooting, playing with great spacing, and getting that ball moving again. Because to me, Branch's best skill is his overlap of perimeter size, length, and shot making. And when the ball's moving and he's had an opportunity to attack closeouts, that's when he could be at his best. I don't think it would be fair to ask him to take on the role that Debonsa has played this year. What's your take on that?
No, I agree now. I'm quite sure that part of the recruiting pitch is come fill AJ's shoes because he's going to go be the number 1 or number 2 draft pick. So obviously that's a very appealing pitch, but he's certainly a different player. You know, Bruce can put the ball on the floor and he can create for himself and others, but he's much better running off of screens, catch, shoot, you know, kind of the ways that you described him. So I think the important thing with Bruce is going to be, as with everyone else, is now how do you build around him in the portal this spring? You know, I think they're going to want to get some bigs who can take some pressure off of him at the rim. You know, and just some other guys around him, maybe another ball handler to help out Rob Wright, just to kind of make things easier for all of them around. But he's a high level guy and very, very good, and certainly a guy who you can plug and play and expect a lot of production out of. But I don't think anyone's going to do this. You can't expect him to be AJ Debonsa, and you've got to understand that he plays a totally different game.
Trav, the last guy I want to ask you about is Jackson Richardson. Jackson Richardson is one of the best athletes in the class, and we've been kind of following his recruitment, waiting to see if new schools are going to jump in. What is the latest?
Yeah, he has been playing to be coming down to a decision here fairly soon. He announced just last week that he was coming down to a decision within the next 2 weeks. Now, I do think that it could bleed on past that 2-week mark and get into 3, maybe 4 weeks from that time. But he's down to 4 finalists, but this is really coming down to just 2 schools in Creighton and Alabama based on my information. And I currently classify this one as a toss-up. I think there's a compelling case to go join both Alabama, who has strong connections and ties with Preston Murphy and his father, Jackson Richardson. And then also Creighton has made him a top priority for a long time now. And that has also made waves within this recruitment. Now, the one thing I would watch in this recruitment is the decision of Caleb Holt. If Caleb Holt makes a decision prior to Jackson Richardson, that could have a big domino effect on where Richardson ultimately ends up.
Bossy, if Creighton is the answer here, Creighton's a program that has historically valued shooting, floor spacing, guys who can run that intricate McDermott offense. Richardson isn't necessarily cut from that same cloth. How would you view the fit at Creighton?
You know, you're right. He's not the typical skill guy that they get, but they do always like to have themselves a nice, lengthy defender and wing out on the perimeter to help them with what they do. So I think he's the type of kid who's so athletic that he fits in anywhere. But, you know, I think Travis is exactly right to bring up the Caleb Holt situation with him being down to Arizona and Alabama. You know, I have to wonder, unless they know Caleb Holt is going to say no to them, I have to wonder if Alabama is going to be willing to take a commitment from Richardson and effectively take themselves out of the Caleb Holt game, especially when they've already got commitments from Taurus Bowie and Caden Samuels on the board. So either Holt or Richardson would be a third wing for them. I have a hard time seeing them take 4 high school wings, whether they be a 2 or 3 in the same class. So this Holt situation definitely is going to have some ripple effect on Richardson.
Well, just like BYU is undoubtedly telling Bill Debonsa's shoes, Bama's undoubtedly telling those guys their guards. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back for our final take here on the CBS Sports Network. As I say at the beginning of each show, this is the only show anywhere on cable TV that will cover the game of basketball all the way from the recruiting trail through college basketball and into the NBA draft. And in this era of college basketball, that connective tissue is more important than ever. We didn't talk a ton about the draft today, but in the coming weeks and months, there's going to be a lot of speculation about that as we weigh the allure of multi-million-dollar first-round draft picks against the allure of million-dollar NIL deals, and the way the high school recruiting trail impacts roster construction, the way those draft decisions impact roster construction. We are going to have that covered for you all spring long. We're back next week, Friday at 1 o'clock, and then in the month of March, you'll see us twice a week right here on the CBS Sports Network. Until then, you can watch past episodes as well as work from my friends Gary Parrish, Matt Norlander, and John Rothstein on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page.